Hello podcasters, welcome to a very special episode of Living History. You may recall that last month I was in the UK, and while I was there I visited the Norfolk Tank Museum just outside Norwich, and it's a fantastic collection of armoured vehicles, artillery and the like. Really worth your while checking out if you're in the area. But the highlight of their collection, the thing that I was there to see the most, is their replica of a World War I Mark IV tank. This is an incredible machine. Using plans, measurements off originals, they've created an exact replica of a Mark IV tank, and it is inch perfect. You would not believe how much this is like an original World War I tank. But the best part about it, because it's brand new, because it was purpose-built, it drives. It's got a working engine, a working transmission, and we got to take it for a spin. It was unbelievable to be inside this tank, to hear the noise, to smell the fumes, to see just how cramped it was for these incredibly brave World War I crews who manned these brand new technology, these new tanks for the first time in battle. So it's a really wonderful museum. I thoroughly recommend you get out there and see it. Check the Facebook page to see video of us driving in this tank and to see all the visuals of what it looked like. But this is the recording. This is my impressions of the tank. And the last minute or so, you'll hear the engine running and the noise from inside that tank as it ran. So a really special experience. I feel very privileged I was able to do it. So I hope you enjoy this experience of driving the Mark IV tank.
A date which will live in infamy.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Well, may we say, God save the Queen, because nothing will save the Governor-General.
There's a second plane just crashed into the World Trade Center. I think we have a terrorist attack.
This was their finest hour.
So, Steve, we're here at the Norfolk Tank Museum, and I've got to say, it's a pretty amazing collection you've got here. How long have you had the museum set up? When did you start collecting?
I started collecting when I was 10, 11 years old, but I set the museum up about 8 years ago.
So, 10 or 11 you started collecting. What were you collecting back then?
Gas masks, shirt buttons, cap badges, anything I could get from a car boot sale. Then it just progressed from there to deactivated weapons and uniforms, and the collection's just grown from that.
What was the first big piece of equipment that you got that's here on display now?
A bit of Saladin armoured car. I bought that 94 and restored that. Yeah, that's still here today.
And how many tanks and armoured vehicles and big stuff have you got in the collection?
There's about 20 now on display. Over 3/4 of them are fully restored and runnable, and the rest of them are, in a restorable condition.
And you've also got artillery pieces, I noticed, and there's a Lewis gun over there on the table. You've got a collection of bayonets. What other stuff have you got here?
We've got 2 German howitzers from the Second World War. We've got a British howitzer from the 1970s. That was one that was captured in the Falklands War from the Argentines. We've got various other bits, a Mighty Antar, which is a tank transporter. We've got some Russian vehicles from the First Gulf War, some surface-to-air missile systems, and mainly tanks.
Fantastic. At what point did you say, I've got this great collection here and I should be sharing this with the general public and open the museum?
Well, I actually done some fundraising, and we raised some money for a local charity about 10 years ago, and a local celebrity to come here to take the check off us, and he went, wow, this collection should be open to the public, and that set the cogs turning, and thought, yeah, all right, let's see what we can do.
And of everything you've got here, do you have a personal favourite? Is there one you come in and sort of pat gently, and that's your personal favourite?
I do, but that changed when we built the Mark IV. I now have to come in and have a nice little stroke of the Mark IV occasionally. Well, every day.
Well, let's talk about the Mark IV, because it's obviously an absolute highlight of the collection. We're sitting in front of it right now, and I'll put some video and some photos up on the Facebook page so you can see. But it is incredible. I mean, this is, it's impossible to believe that you built this from scratch. I'm looking. I've seen these in museums. It's exactly the same.
Yeah, it's as close as anybody's ever going to get to the original tank. It's absolutely fantastic. JCB, who built the hull, done an absolute brilliant job of it. There's another company called Chasted. They built a lot of the smaller parts. RH Barrel engineering company, he does tank restorations and makes parts up. He's done some of the Lewis gun mounts and stuff. And we just collected everything together, and we built an amazing replica.
So tell me the story. What was the inspiration to build the tank? Did you think it was possible at the start when you began to do it? How did you actually go about it?
Well, it was obviously built for the Channel 4 documentary with Guy Martin. The sort of passion behind it was that one of the producers that owned the company, Norfolk TV, his father was out in Cambrai. He served on tanks in the First World War, and he happened to phone me up one day and was talking about the project, and I just thought it was an amazing project and said, I've got to be on board, and it went from there.
And was it a challenge getting original plans, getting an idea of how you were actually going to go about it?
Yes, and initially we went to one of the museums and we measured another Mark IV tank. We took a lot of drawings off that, and as we were going through photographing every part that we could photograph, a gentleman from Germany came forward and said, I've got a CAD drawing of this tank, would you like to use it? And that just changed everything, because this CAD drawing is amazing, and it's made it possible to build what we've got today now.
So you had full computer plans of basically of what the tank should look like?
Yeah, he's a modeller from Germany. He obviously builds scale models of the tanks, and he decided that the models of the Mark IV tank that were available to buy weren't good enough, so he spent 4 years drawing every detail past the tank to enable him to make his own model, and I suppose credit to him, we've now made a model of his 3D CAD drawing.
Fantastic. A life-size model standing here looking at it. What was the process to go from this harebrained idea that you're going to build a World War I tank to the finished product?
Well, I suppose JCB gave us the chance to do that. They were able to transfer the CAD drawings that we'd got to actual drawings that we could work with, so they could cut the steel and make and weld the hull. I initially built the engine, the gearbox and the running gear, and then we assembled the whole tank at the museum here last year.
And how realistic is this tank, both inside and out, compared to what the servicemen of the First World War would have seen?
I think a First World War soldier today walked in there would know exactly what he was walking into. It's as close as anybody's ever going to get to the original.
I can see from the outside it's 100% correct. I mean, I'm looking at it and it looks just like an original. What about on the inside?
Again, it's the engine's in the right place. We've used we've used an axle and a transmission from a tractor, so it's going back to what it originally was. It was built from agricultural technology then in 1916, 1917, so it's very, very close to what they would have seen, what they would have been able to use.
Fantastic. So the engine, the gearbox, these came from a tractor, is that?
Well, the engine came from a Rolls-Royce armoured car. We wanted to use a petrol engine, so we had to use something that we could find that was petrol. There's not many petrol engines about, not big ones that we could get the parts for, so that stepped in and done the job that way. The gearbox and back axles from a Ford 5000 tractor.
And what's the size of the engine to power this big beast?
120 brake horsepower, almost the same as the original. We've tried to keep it so it drives like the original. It struggles. It does exactly what the original one's done.
Well, fantastic. Let's go and have a look.
We're now walking around the Mark IV tank. It's a female version, so it's got 2 Lewis guns in each sponson. The female, compared with the male version, had 2 Lewis guns. The male version had a 6-pounder and 1 Lewis gun each side, and then had an additional Lewis at the front. We've got 5 Lewis guns. It's got the smaller sponsons with the escape hatches below them. It's just a phenomenal tank. Obviously at the front, as per the original, we've got 1 Lewis gun in the middle. We've got the driver's and the commander's hatches up the top. We've named Deborah 2 after the original Deborah tank that was discovered outside Cambrai a few years ago. We've met some of the surviving relatives of the original crew of Deborah. It's been very emotional, that has. While we're manufacturing, we try to get the original track plaids and everything to as close as the original, so these have all been stamped out of 10mm steel with the rib and everything, so every bit has been made as close as we can get to the original vehicle.
And what about the markings on it, Steve? The paintwork and the symbols and the numbers, how realistic is that?
Well, the triangle is an original, as was on the side of Deborah. I've got to say, I can't remember what it stands for. Brain's gone dead. 2620 is a number we gave it. I think that again is the same. Well, it is exactly the same number as what Deborah was. So yeah, she all means something. Every little bit does.
So just explain for people that don't know that this is a female tank with machine guns. What was the difference between the female and the male tank?
The male tank was armed with 2 6-pounder tank guns and 3 Lewis machine guns. The female was armed with 5 Lewis machine guns. And to be truthful, the female was probably done a better job in the battlefield than the male, because you can mow down more infantry with a machine gun than you can with an artillery gun.
And I think that's the important thing to remember, isn't it? That these tanks in the First World War were not designed in the same way that the high-speed tanks of the Second World War were designed for taking territory. These were to deal with trenches, weren't they?
Yeah, they were designed to crush the barbed wire and cross trenches and enable the troops to get into the enemy lines.
And, of course, the famous shape of the tank was for the same purpose, wasn't it?
Yeah, the rhomboid shape was done so it can enable to cross ditches, and the high front nose was to crush the barbed wire and all the entanglements that the Germans had put up to stop us getting there.
Let's have a look inside. Well, we're inside now, Steve, and it's tight in here. I mean, as you said before, this is laid out, as per the original, isn't it, from World War I?
Yeah, just as the original. 2 Lewis machine guns each side, a small walkway down each side of the tank, enable the crew to get around it and get access to the front of the vehicle. But the engine is smack bang in the middle of the vehicle. Now, these guys were working around an engine that was running at 120, 130 degrees. They were working in a vehicle where exhaust gases were escaping continually, so they were being poisoned by carbon monoxide all times. Plus the heat, plus the guns firing, the cordite from the guns firing. They did really not know what they were doing.
How many crew in a tank of this size?
8 people in this vehicle.
8 people squeezed in here?
Yeah, you've got 2 gunners each side. You've got a commander and a driver at the front, and you've got 2 gearsmen at the back. It's quite complicated to actually manoeuvre the vehicle around. If they wanted to turn the vehicle, they had to bring the vehicle to a stop. They had to disengage the drive from one of the tracks, apply a steering brake and a diff lock, and then move the vehicle forward. Once the turn had been achieved, they then had to bring the vehicle to a stationary again, put the track back in gear, take the diff lock out before they can move off again.
This is really armoured technology in its infancy, isn't it? I mean, the Mark IV was quite a good development on the earlier tanks, but this is really the early days of tank warfare, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. This is, I don't know what you want to call it, it's hell really, isn't it? To put this into the battlefield, have machine guns firing at you, artillery firing at you, under all that duress, and still you've got to be able to work in the vehicle.
Just horrific. I wish everyone you could be in here with me. Well, I'm glad you're not. It is tight in here. There's no space at all. Steve and I are kind of jammed in. There's only 2 of us in here, and yet there would have been a crew of 8. It's absolutely extraordinary. Steve, I'm just looking at the front where the driver and the commander would have sat. Do we know exactly how the layout would have worked when the tank was in combat?
No, we don't. We believe that, depending on what day of the week it was, the commander would have said, well, you're going to drive today, I'm going to do the steering. Or, vice versa, he said, no, you can steer today, I'm going to command. There's accounts of, the commander and the driver being sitting in both positions.
So we've got no way of knowing. I mean, it sounds like they would have mixed it up as they went.
Yeah. Fatigue, one day we had a rough day yesterday, you can drive, another day, swapped around.
I just can't imagine what it would have been like squashed in here, and up the front there's just a couple of panels to look out through the armour. Just would have been absolutely horrific.
Yeah, as you say, this is early days, early stages of tank warfare. Every day they're learning something, and the tank is advancing. And look what we've got today. The challenges, the Leopards, the tanks of today can all be stemmed back to this particular vehicle.
Wonderful.